All Things Data podcast. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science and data-driven strategies to enable digital transformation. The hosts are Dr. Manjeet Rege, Associate Professor of Data Science, and Dan Yarmulke, Director of Business Development of IoT and Data Science.
You are listening to the All Things Data podcast. My name is Manjeet Rege, and today we'll be talking about digital transformation with one of the biggest names in the business today. I'm joined by my co-host, Dan Yarmulke. Hi, Dan.
How you doing, Manjeet?
Doing well.
So we got one of the best, I believe, one of my favorite authors on the subject of digital transformation, Michael Gale. He founded Strategic Oxygen in 2001, which was widely seen as one of the technology industry's primary data tool sets for marketers, used by over 20 brands and used to model over $4 billion in marketing and sales investments. It was sold to the Monitor Group, and he was a group partner from 2006 to 2010. In 2011, he became a partner at PulsePoint Group, a digital consulting company, which was also acquired by ICF. And Michael has been in various positions as Chief Web Officer and GM of Micron. He's got stuff going on now where he's interim marketing and sales and communications experts for a variety of people, but he's a thought leader. And how I was introduced to Michael was his book called The Digital Helix, which is Wall Street Journal bestseller. So I couldn't be happier to have my two favorite thinkers on the show. Welcome, Michael.
Oh, what a great intro. Thank you. I'm actually probably more excited than you are because we're going to have some fun today talking about a lot of uncertain things. And I think that's often the best conversations anyway.
Absolutely. Michael, you have spent a lot of time, thinking about and contributing about digital transformation. Why don't you get us started? What does digital transformation really mean for today's enterprises, and why is it important?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, I've struggled to do it in an elevator pitch. So I'm about to try something I've not tried before. So we'll work out if it succeeds or fails. We have historically lived in a horse and buggy and train-based IT environment. We do something, we send it out, and it sort of comes back 2 or 3 days later, or minutes or seconds. Digital transformation is as dramatic effect on the way we think about businesses as cars were when it affected the way we thought about manufacturing, when we think about infrastructure, when we think about telecommuting. So the world of horses and carts looks nothing like the world of cars. And I think the world of IT looks nothing like the world of a digitally transformed environment where everything matters in real time, in microseconds. And decisions are made often subconsciously by a business because they want to become a digital platform. They actually want customers, employees, and partners to function as the primary mirror or window through this digital sort of eyelet that they work with.
And, so where should enterprises really start in terms of this digital transformation journey, so to speak?
Well, I think the reality is it can't be with technology. It has to be with a vision. So you have to be able to say, look, what do we want to be in a world of 3-5 years time? Maybe if companies that had made horses and buggy sort of systems said, hey, this car thing could change the type of economics we have, that's where you have to go. So the thing we found from the book and other research we did with Forbes 2 years ago was that really successful companies, really successful organizations, basically their execs spend on average 17.5 hours a week thinking about digital transformation, designing their workloads around digital transformation and experimenting. That's 2.5 days a week, right? So if you think about a busy exec in sales, they should be thinking 2.5 days a week about how do I digitally transform the way I work with my customers. It needs that intellectual surgery on a consistent basis to get there. The array of technologies in front of us is so exciting right now. Could you imagine saying to a horse and buggy company, I could get a car to run at 200 miles an hour, by the way, and it'd be run by this thing called a computer. That is the magnitude of difference I think we see in front of us. And unless you can imagine that and think about applying it, we will do what I call digital wrapping, which is we'll wrap the business with some sense of digital, but you won't change its core DNA. So things like AI, to me, it's not about the technology because it's all really remarkable. It's about how do you get it to work? How do you stick it in a headless device on the edge, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think about using, not just using data, but saying to a system, hey, you automate the processes here because I want to free up my humans for more creative stuff. I'm asking people to do boring, repetitive things. I could get machines to do that. And by the way, they're really, really good at it. So I think part of this is about this conversation and imagining what it could look like in your organization, because the technology is highly digestible, extraordinarily interconnected, and it's unbelievable what it produces really quickly.
You know, Michael, and this is kind of tying on to what Manjeet said, is there's been a lot of difficulty in for these executives to spend that 2.5 days thinking like this, because the exponential rate of change and the enabling layers of technology are very deep. And like you said, it's not everything, but it's being able to see the possibilities with them. And where do you see the State of the Union? It has been 2 years since you read the book. To me, it seems right front and center. It was prophetic as to what's happening with COVID, but it's just under this VUCA kind of world. We've been talking about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And why have they failed, in your opinion, now 2 years after?
This is like, why is democratic capitalism having a heart attack right now?
Yeah.
I think there's two reasons why, and some of it actually goes back to business school. Much of what we teach executives, a large portion of gone through MBAs at business school, is find your model, get your part of Michael Porter's forces, and just execute. But in a world of constant change, VUCA is almost a constant. You have to have this sort of AQ, adaptive intellectual process that says, hold it, something feels wrong here in the practical, and it feels to me we're not stretching through the ceiling in the vision. So part of the thing that's concerning is when we started tracking this in 2013, the rate of change between 2013 and the last piece of work in 2019 is only about 11.5% compound annual change rate, I would call it, which means it's still going to take another 8 years to get there. I believe that COVID will increase that speed of transformation by at least 30%. So what used to look like 11 will probably end up looking like anything between 15 and 20%, because crisis induces a sense of change smell. If you often speak to an athlete, they'll tell you after they've been concussed, they can smell metal, or they just have a very acute sense of smell. It's because a crisis just engenders a real sense of clarity about why companies have to move this way. If you speak to a Sears, or you speak to even a Target, Neiman's, anybody in retail that is not digitally transformed, they're out of business. That's why you've seen all these companies fold. Even the smallest little coffee shops should be transforming the way they interact with customers. They should be using cell phone-based technology to track what you buy, to send you messages, and to say, hey, hope everything's okay. We're going to be back open after this. Come back and see us. But people don't invest that sort of money. They'd much rather invest it on signage, or they'd much rather invest it on a new table. So I think COVID in itself will induce a sense of clarity, sort of like being knocked out, where I think people will feel a little dizzy, not quite there, but will look at a different sense of the future about how to deliver it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Michael, can you talk about a few success stories, just so that our listeners can kind of wrap their heads around how certain companies have been able to successfully transform themselves? And then in that same way, you can also talk about maybe failures.
Well, there'll be so many failures. We could decide if we don't do them by magnitude or by alpha. But let me give you, I think, 3 really good success stories that we'll relate to. One is USAA. USAA is the military service insurance company based in San Antonio, Texas. Mm-hmm. Always had extraordinary levels of customer service. I mean, you could call them 24/7, because if you're in Germany and your car's broken, or you're in Saudi and something's gone wrong there, or you're in the middle of Oklahoma, they're going to be available to you because of the service you've given the country, and also the service you may be giving right now. They took one of the core components from the digital Helix around data, which says, hey, look, there are new themes of data, new streams as well. We've got to find these new intersection points. Sometimes things are relevant, sometimes things are not. So they produce a daily dashboard of all the things that matter in the business. Now, that's not in itself unusual. Well, they give it to everybody. Everybody gets the same dashboard, from the CEO to a call center individual. Secondly, they change that dashboard as necessary. So variables leave or variables come back on again. So they see data as a fluid, almost like a weather report for how the business is doing. So by giving everybody that daily weather report and changing necessarily the patterns on it, they have really empowered people at the edge. So what they've done is they've said to people, look, given this metric issue, you're responsible for part of it. How will you change your behavior today with customers? How will you work more efficiently in maybe claims processing? How will you think about preemptive knowledge that could change the way we work? They've literally pushed decisions to the edge. They've empowered from the center a daily consistent view of the world, and it does change. And they are outrageously successful as an insurance company. I mean, to the point that if they were ever to be sold, and they're not because they're private, they could have one of the highest P ratios of any insurance company ever sold in the world. And it's just everybody has transparent, fluid access, but they make decisions in the moment. They don't say, well, it's not my job. Everybody leans in. So that's a great commercial example of using data in a fluid, adaptive digital way. The other organization is actually the GSA, which is the government's procurement agency. It wouldn't itself be, I think, the 10th largest economy in the world. It would be bigger than Italy. But if you want to buy something for the government, you have to go through this portal to do it. And it's everything from clocks to chairs to anything, toothbrushes. They recognize that this was probably the most remarkable market sector ever produced. I mean, literally dynamic, real-time purchasing by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions. Again, they've made that data extremely available to all the staff at all the agencies, but also they've applied AI to start looking at things like predictive pricing, predictive cost management. Now, clearly the crisis was not something you could model for, because just-in-time supply systems will never work in a crisis. But their ability to optimize price, optimize availability, and to sort of almost pre-predict the problem allows them to supply chain manage infinitely better than we've ever seen before. Those are two wonderful examples of where knowledge and the application of constant feeding time. So let me tell you some disasters. I think the retail business is full of some great successes and some absolute horrendous mistakes, because this is a business that had customers coming in and out, day in, day out, day in and day out. So I look at people like Nordstrom, or I look at people like Saks, I look at people like Target. Their inability to see a consumer as a physical and a virtual human being, they just see it as a transaction, means they have lost, I think, billions of dollars of revenue because they have no customer intimacy. They don't know what you did yesterday. They don't know what you're going to do tomorrow. They can't predict your pattern. They can't link your digital and physical identity together. And part of the issue is it's just a lack of vision. But all the retail companies that will survive COVID-19 will see a consumer as a virtual and a physical presence. They will want to give consumers insight and value. So, for example, if they say, you just bought this product 5 days ago, by the way, we just did a price action on it, here's a credit, they'll keep customers. But until those organizations assume that customers are individuals, not large social clusters, they have a digital or physical presence, they're all doomed to failure. And I could go through a list of them by alphabet. Debenhams in the UK, PC World, obviously, as I said, I think Nordstrom's here, Target, Macy's. They've just failed to digitally adapt their lifestyles, and their ecosystems digitally wrap. They don't digitally enhance or digitally live.
Michael, I think the issue is we're at a crossroads of people wanting to go digitally, but they don't, there's a perception that the costs are very high and resources are very high, the software engineering, competencies, understanding all these enabling layers we've been talking about. And they kind of they start going down these major investments that blow up in their face because they don't understand these connected moments. They don't understand software engineering or this digital infrastructure as we're talking about, and the requisite costs. So they always go back to their standard. What is the channel doing? What is my P&L? So when you're looking, I know you're dealing with very prestigious large organizations that can shift investments. What do you say to the medium-sized customers that have resource restrictions yet need to go this way? How do you tell them to take these steps forward?
And it's a really elegantly put statement, because it's super easy to be trite here and say, well, if you don't do this, you're not going to survive, right? That's not helpful. So it's a good question. I think what we've learned are 3 answers that people need to get to. Find 3 places that you can digitally transform that are connected inside your organization. Start there. But don't just do one because it'll be an island, but pick 3. It's sort of like when you play Risk. You don't just do country by country. You try and pick off continents. So pick off 3 connected areas. It could actually be supply chain, accounting, and billables. It could be account-based marketing. It could be sales interaction with the account, and it could be sales enablement. But pick off 3 connected areas and say, right, what can we do in 180 days to transform the functionality and output of those areas? And I think that in itself, the 180-day limit, the 3-section piece helps you control budget. It looks for easy wins in that connected world. And I think the third thing is you're going to make mistakes, right? Live with it, right? You can't succeed in the new world by using old tools to solve new problems. So you've got to accept that your businesses have to transform. What is amazing, there's a comment that Michael Schrag from MIT made to me a while ago, was why generally industrial revolutions take between 57 and 87 years. This is going to take less than 20, right? So there sort of is no choice. As the clock is running, let's say from 2013, 14, you've got less than 10 years to get this right. You're going to have to do it in some way. It's going to be an awful lot cheaper now to start it than to wait for 10 years' time when you're in crisis. Again, look at the retail sector for this. Look at GE. I mean, GE has failed to digitally transform its offerings, its service levels, and the way it's run as a corporation. That's why it's literally left the stock exchange, because it cannot illustrate leadership in the way that Jack Welch would have talked about it 20 years ago. So I think that the pick off 3 connected, give yourself 180 days, be prepared to fail. That generally, and I'm sure that Bain and McKinsey will hate me saying that, is the DNA for how you get to start to be successful. Actually, I don't think this is as expensive as people think it is. The real expense is the mental shift.
Mm-hmm.
DevOps is already there, right? If you speak to any DevOps professional, if a DevSecOps person, they're like, yeah, whatever, right? We're using containers. We're moving to the cloud. Everything's cloud native, right? I think IT is, in my opinion, the absolute best example of what this explorational world looks like. And you've got to get them involved because they've already gone through this transition over the last 4 years in terms of the cloud. They can help business functions get comfortable getting uncomfortable.
Well, that's true also, Manjeet. I get the feeling like it's a little bit of lazy thinking, Michael, in terms of, a software engineer is 150K or some AI guy is 200K. And you have to think about your problem. You have to kind of understand what bits can be automated and how simply they can be automated with DevOps in the cloud. I mean, data science should be injected into the business curriculum. I did an MBA and then I did, this graduate degree in data science, and the difference is stark, and people have to just understand these cost structures and really, really emphasize or empathize with the customer journey and what you actually want to automate or what data do you want to see sprung from there. I just find they're not thinking of it, and they're kind of, the traditional executives who are CFOs, et cetera, are just kicking it to software guys and then kind of lost in the costs. And
that's like a patient blaming the psychologist, right? No, this is we are all responsible here, but I am always enthralled, captivated by how IT professionals that get this are able to reimagine the state of a business. So, for example, AI is about its application. It's an incredibly intellectual, marvelous discourse we could have about the technologies involved. But most of the most successful AI projects I've watched, and a project with IBM recently in the cognitive systems group, most of the ROI goes to about 15% of companies. When you work through the DNA of those companies, they're highly collaborative, they're open to experimentation, and as you've just said, they have a real understanding of what they're trying to get out of it. They go, hey, we need to get these level tier 1 results. We need to know this on level 2, and on level 3, this is what we can experiment with. But they have a very clear collaborative architecture, and I don't think it can be a dictate from the top of a company, make it happen. This is about rolling your sleeves up. This is about a modern executive who doesn't sit in a walnut-crusted office, but probably sits at a table with other executives in a big area, and they just grind it out. It's just not glamorous. And I think the problem is when things aren't glamorous, execs often aren't appealed to it.
That's exactly right. I have found in some of the disruptive moments that I've experienced in IoT, it's definitely grinding it out with the right subject matter experts that do really mundane things or have done them in the past that were considered custodians of machines. And we've been able to interject that with data scientists to find a moment to automate. And those moments are usually incredibly boring. But if you look at it from a time domain perspective of how many times am I lifting up my coffee cup and can I free up that hand to do something else? Those are the disruptive moments, but I don't think people find glamour in that. They find glamour in other ways.
Beautifully put. There's an interesting study that somebody once did, I think at Princeton, when they said to somebody, tell me the 1,000 things you do in a day, right? Really boring, okay? And when you look at it, they were able to allocate like 20 or 30 that could be done differently. And then they said, right, if you do these things differently, come back to us in 90 days and just see if you can get them done. People were like, changed my life, right? I just think we look for giant leaps where really small steps that are well planned have an enormous effect on the world around us.
Michael, I just want to piggyback on the earlier question that Dan asked about medium-sized companies. What's your opinion on a large enterprise trying to, steer its way towards digital transformation and finding it difficult? What I always see in my applications of data science and AI, companies are trying to transform themselves into an AI-first company is AI is not getting embedded into the DNA of the company, whereas many times what I see is that they form this small kind of a startup unit within the larger enterprise, and that could be an AI unit, and then that particular unit kind of takes off. So it is as if you have a big ship, you're trying to steer in a different direction, but then you have a small kind of a speedboat that comes out of it and takes off, but the ship still stays on the same track.
Yeah, so one of the arguments of any form of change is it's easy just to take the foot off the accelerator, right? But it's the cornering that's a huge problem because you've got G forces against you. So you either need to have a completely re-engineered car that can get through those forces, generally light, highly connected mobile frame, or you have to assume you're going to power through it and have a crash. So what generally happens in really big organizations is a design mistake. Is somebody needs to sit there and say, right, what do we need to stop? What do we need to start? What do we need to do different? What do we need to continue? And by the way, what's an immediate outcome? And then what's a stretch outcome? And then what's a crazy outcome? If you have those three elements and those four sort of capacity points, things can work. But I do think there's a proclivity from about 68% of CEOs in the Fortune 2000 to try and digitally wrap an existing business that's actually been transformed by the world around it, but they haven't paid enough attention to it. GE is a phenomenal example. If you look at the engine business, the industrial plants business, they completely missed an amazing opportunity to do automated AI-based tracking, automated maintenance, automated control systems. So I look at people like ABB, Emerson, Schneider. They went there. They said, look, we understand that basic maintenance stuff is ugly. As Dan has said, it's painful, and it's not a pleasant discussion. But if we can rip 30% of your costs out here through the whole ecosystem, why would you not want to do it? So that vision from them compared to the lack of vision from GE, I think, is that moment, right, where language didn't facilitate the right type of success. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And I think that's where large companies is they have too much hubris and they're not humble enough. And I think being humble is an important part of this process.
Guys, what I really see at the forefront here from this conversation is this adaptive quotient that you're talking about. And it should be noted that everybody on this podcast has lived in various countries. I've lived in about 7. Michael, we can hear an accent. Manjeet is originally from India. So we have this DNA in us to adapt, and I know certain people don't like that kind of foreigner persona in the United States, but I've always looked at change as something interesting so that is something that's very personal to me. And I've found I've been able to thrive in that environment, but for others, it's a massive change.
Well, look at the nationalities of some of these CEOs in the most important leading companies right now. Uber, Google, Microsoft, right? They are born of a adaptability construct and a global understanding of what the world's really about. America has always been about ease of commerce, ease of language, ease of sort of business model process, right? If you've not been born in the US or you've lived outside, you've had to have an adaptive capacity to live against the largest geographic economic giants, in the world. So when you come here, then you're naturally capable of adaptive, defensive, and offensive strategy.
It's interesting you mentioned that because, you had on your podcast, the Microsoft head of AI, and I did not know he was a refugee that worked for
Amazing
Obama.
story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nate Johannes, incredible human being.
We had a similar individual that is a IT executive at Medtronic and then does some social entrepreneurship for Africa, and also had a similar story, a friend of ours. But I really want to get into this digital helix because now the DNA theme, actually, now I can see how you obsessed over this, what you call the digital helix in the DNA. And Michael has 7 kind of constituent components. We can, number 1 is executives as digital helix explorers. We understand that. I would like you to double click a little bit because this is the one that I had to read about 50 times.
That's bad writing. I'm sorry.
No, so let me read the 7, but then we'll double click into 1. So executives as digital helix explorers. 2 is theme and stream. 3 is customers have experiential portfolios. 4 is marketing and communications as flow. 5, sales are connected moments. 6, everybody's responsible to each other. And 7, in the moment, one step ahead always. There's a few there that are, tough. So can you go into theme and stream, experiential portfolios, and connected moments?
Yeah, I'll do it actually 30 seconds each. Right. So themes and streams, traditionally we look at one set of data coming from one source. The world, though, is actually about data coming from various sources or actually new sources changing. So maybe it's a COVID-19 source of information. It won't matter in 9, hopefully 12 weeks' time. So themes and stream basically talk about a network effect of information where things could pass from value in one end to disvalue in the other. So understanding that fluid nature of interaction is fundamental for success because it's not just old sources repackaged. The second thing, I think, when you think about customers' portfolios of experiences, I'll give you a simple example. You're going to book a holiday. You go into a travel agent, sounds very 1980s, and they show these beautiful brochures. Oh, wow, you can go to Rhodes. It's a great place. You say, I'm just going to check this out. So you go to Instagram, you go to Pinterest, you check a few friends at Facebook. In fact, the hotel that they're telling you exists, it sort of exists, but there's a lot of concrete around it, and it's had bad food reviews. Customers have portfolios of experiences. You can't just manage an experience that you own. You have to think about what they see, feel, and hear anywhere else. And that's important because the marketing fails doing that, because things that are like bad reviews you can't control may be more powerful than the $10 million you spend suggesting a film. Just think about Rotten Tomatoes and what that has done to the film industry. It has really put a brake on movies or oddly accelerated films that generally haven't done that well commercially. That's an experiential moment. What was the third one we wanted to talk about?
Sales are connected moments.
Right, so we always think about sales journeys, and I go, no, customers don't have one journey. It's like a pachinko machine. They start at the top, and there's a whole bunch of little metal bars they can cut to go into the bottom. Some of these moments in combination, like DNA, are much more important than others. So our argument to clients is don't think about journeys, think about the top 20 moments you can control. Because you can't control the 150 that are there, but think about the 20 points of insertion you have, like Manchester strategy. And I think this moments discourse, this portfolio comprehension, and understanding the fluid nature of data is what makes USAA so successful in this process. Hallmark has been successful too. MasterCard has been successful. Citibank, because they understand the moment, themes and streams of portfolio discourse.
That's excellent. To me, what you're describing as an executive or a DNA is somebody who's constantly paranoid going a million miles an hour.
Yeah, and it is. That's what I'm saying. You can't do it in a suit and you can't do it in a walnut encrusted office because you don't get to see the world. It's why Michael was successful at Dell. It's why Steve was very successful at Apple. It's this constant focus on what a customer is telling us I could be doing differently or better now. In fact, their machines were built to be adaptive. Nobody would have thought a kid in a dorm at University of Texas peeling off labels from an old IBM and cleaning the hard drive would have a business that's probably after this worth about $40 billion. I mean, he will be one of the world's wealthiest people instantly again because he took that risk. Again, Steve went back and got $100 million from Bill and built an empire that's still around after us because he was obsessed with getting it right. You've got to constantly talk to customers, constantly listen to what was happening. And it is a constant sense of paranoia, not comfort.
And it is listening to some noise that's outside your inner sanctum, your ear has got to be a lot more in tune digitally. It's not listening to what, people are clearly out of touch based upon the quote unquote experts. What are experts now when you have these connected moments or these portfolios of experiences that are outside their information source? So it's.
And I don't think there are experts anymore. That is an interesting. I just don't think experts exist.
Right. I mean, experts exist in your journey, right? In that journey
Yeah.
of yours and your experience set. So,
and if you listen to Satya, that's how Satya has this growth mindset, which is, look, my expertise is my thirst for curiosity, is my thirst for knowledge, is my thirst for getting better. It's not what I know, it's what I want to know, how I want to learn it, where I want to take it. I think that's a really fascinating world. And generally, technologists are infinitely better than that than business people.
Yeah, that curiosity. I mean, I also really appreciate Satya's emphasis, and I'm not dissing anybody, but like their growth inside the cloud market has
stunning.
It's stunning, and one of the big reasons I've heard, or what I've heard from customers, is AWS talks about themselves, and Microsoft is obsessed with your problems.
And if you look at their mission, and one of the leading exponents of this model, Kevin Dallas, is now running a transforming embedded business, is that they understand that customers are at the epicenter of this new world. It is not, I have a product, buy it. It's like, hold it, what do you need to achieve? How can I help you get there? And it's much more of a solution discourse. And, as long as you make the right general packages of stuff, people will want it. But AWS was built for people to self-actualize. They realized it was making an awful lot of money. And then they've forgotten to understand what the future looks like. So basically, they just try and sell stuff. And it just doesn't work in the long run.
Michael, since we are talking about transformation here, can you also talk a little bit about enterprise culture and how that may be an enabler or may also be a barrier to digital transformation?
So actually, let me take two examples of IBM. I think of Microsoft, because if I go back to Lou Gerstner, 1991, he transformed a company from a thing business to a thing business that had a solutions construct, which is why the services business got so big, because they could link technology to ideas really quickly. Microsoft in itself was a thing business, OS, Office applications, SQL Server, everything else. This is the moment where they diverged, and I think Steve does not get enough credit, Balmer, for this process. IBM kept trying to incrementalize itself to success. Sam Palmisano, the last CEO, by just doing things a little bit better. Then they eventually bought Red Hat, smart move. Microsoft said, no, if we're going to make a difference here, we need to fundamentally transform how we work. We're going to take our most profitable product, Office, and we're going to stick it in the cloud, right? We're going to give you key codes that we just quietly load on a machine. There's none of this sort of mirroring. And you decide, 3-year, 1-year, 2-year, but we're going to make it really easy to work with us. For $99 a year versus $400 for life, you're really cool. Oh my God. The O360 confirmation to cloud was breathtakingly fast because they lent into a transformative viewpoint of the world. So if I think about companies like Rubbermaid, very boring example, they make cleaning equipment or container equipment. What about if they said, hold it, if we have to clean floors in offices, why don't we make Android? Why don't we make robots that clean floors in offices? And then we put sensors in trash cans that tell us when they need to be emptied. In fact, when we sell that product, we'll sell you 40 sensors or 16 Android vacuum cleaners. They just haven't got there because they couldn't see the problem is bigger than the products they sell. And that's the biggest challenge that enterprises face. GE has miserably failed in that area too. As I said, I think companies like ABB, Emerson, Schneider in the electronics, all the electrical business done really well. It's a lack of visionscaping. And I think that one of the things that needs to happen, an exec needs to sit there and says, I need to see 100 stories in my sector about successful digital transformation. If I can see 100 stories, it might motivate me to get my act together in the right way. And that's often the difference, is this sort of curiosity to learn, which clearly sits at the beginning of where Microsoft went, Gates, Balmer, but Satya in particular is off the scale. And as an immigrant, I need to be flexible to learn culture. And that's where enterprises basically succeed or fail. You can see Morgan Stanley's gone through this really well, but a vast array of regional banks have no understanding how to interact with customers, for example, that don't go into branches anymore, right? When was the last time you guys physically went to a bank branch?
I avoided at all costs.
And everybody always did, right? When was the last time you went to buy a car? Nobody likes buying a car, right? That's why Carvana and these other firms are succeeding, because they solve a fundamental problem that is around the human psychology. And I think this is where enterprises fail, is this lack of articulation of what success could be like, what it's been like elsewhere, and how to learn from it. Zara, it's a brilliant example. It's a huge clothing firm. Until COVID, was the most valuable clothing retailer in the world. Every single one of their reps is given a tablet. When they talk to somebody, they get feedback on a product. Maybe a product somebody touched and put down, or maybe a product somebody bought. But they're constantly putting that feedback back in the hands of the designers, back in the hands of the supply chain. Simple, and particularly when women shop, you'll notice this. Touch and feel is everything. They'll walk through 1,000 pieces of clothing, touching and feeling the material. Well, nobody ever thinks about material, touch and feel. They just think about shape and price. Zara is stunningly good at getting every single variety of a clothing that works in a store in there at the right sizes versus another store 5 miles away that has a completely different range structure to it. It's an amazing sensitivity to being in the moment.
You know, Mike, one last thing that I'd like to touch upon is how do you encourage executives to look at, we talk about profitability, we talk about going from CapEx to OpEx, we have these institutions like the channel. How, if you were to go at a high level, I was often, tugging with the executives to look at things differently, and that these are table stakes to survive. However, there's still, let's drill into not that services are more profitable, but how to look at the world going forward in order to transform from a financial perspective, because that's what all the executives want is brass tacks at the end of the day.
So let me give an interesting brass tacks discussion I'm involved in directly right now. All services businesses have great margin, but they have low dollars, because at the end of the day, a services business is pretty much, I've got brains, I'll give you what you need because it's cheaper to use me to do it than to spend 10 years building it yourself. Where the services business is going is microservices. I need this, I need that. How can you standardize this and then customize the back end of it? I need it for 20 hours, or I need it for 40 days. Being able to turn your services business into a microservices infrastructure is the golden fleece. Now, the big guys, McKinsey, Bain, IBM, all these others, all the biggest firms in the world put together, only account for 20% of all the services revenue in the world. Think about that. There's enormous growth for microservices, for companies looking to sell fractions, pieces, moments to a customer that can basically say, look, there's a standard way of doing this, I'll add 15% in. That's how I revolutionize the services business. I try and productize everything I could possibly do in the experience. So whether or not it's automation, which I think is a hot market for AI and services, it's autonomy, it's what I call AI decision-making processes. If I was trying to sell a chatbot company right now, I wouldn't care two hoots about the chatbot. What I care about is the application of the intelligence straight back into the system.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly how I in the IoT world is it's forget the rocket ship, which is the sensor, forget the platform in the cloud. Nobody is emphasizing or has empathy with the customer journey. They want a result. They want to know, okay, does it sense what it's doing? Is it a problem? How do I fix the problem and stick it interoperated into my other systems? Tell me what to do. And it's been trying to productize that moment, which is almost like licensing, because nobody wants to use your software. Is it, what machination is that? But when I ask that question, I hear you loud and clear. It's like, how do you look at centers of profit? So if you say it's low dollar, high margin, but also high costs, it's not easy that necessarily. Well, it depends if it's software based or human touching and working with software, kind of like GE's Power by the Hour, right? How would you encourage them to think?
I would think about a different drawing. The traditional drawing has been, how much do I put into this? Every event I have, how much is my total margin dollar? All right.
Yep.
and that's the typical services model, right? It's cost per interaction, cost per hour. The way to make microservices work economically is say, look, how many interactions are there out there? What's the value from each interaction? And what should be the cost of adding value into that interaction? So you look at a different formula that's multiple moments, not just one solution. So again, I use chatbot companies because I think the reality is 98% of all service and support will be done by chatbots in less than 5 years. Because if we all buy online, we all have basic questions. There's incredible learnings from that for product, services, delivery. And I think what you want to be able to say is, where's the value? Where's the cost value? Where's the added value? And what's the value of innovation and learning? Because I'd argue chatbots could be our number one research resource for companies. Maybe we get rid of research functions. Maybe we get rid of consultants. A chatbot will tell us more in a day than any consultant could probably tell us in a year. So I think it rips costs out of a whole other parts of the business, as you've said, we need to look at. And it also, more importantly, the transaction itself isn't always the most valuable piece that we get out of it. It's those multiplier effects that go around the edge. Look, Uber does not own its own infrastructure. Its individuals own their own cars. They sign onto the Uber system. Now, what else could Uber be used for? Oh my gosh. I mean, one of the interviews we did on the podcast with Forbes looks at Uber actually being able to deliver 50 to 100 pound packages to what they call localized car park airports. That's where the real upside of this comes from, not from traditional linear economic modeling. Does that make sense?
That's really the point here, is it's not traditional economic modeling. For me, the takeaway is to think of it differently, right? And you emphasized a lot of different ways to look at that. It's just, if we're speaking different languages of economic terms of yesteryear, it's not beneficial to get forward. And these are these cultural shifts we've been talking through this whole conversation. So it is a DNA, right? I mean, it's going all the way down to the ethos and what people think and how they work and interact with each other, how they look at the world. This is whole scale change. This is not just digital, like you said, tools. So we got one last question from Manjeet that he would like to put forth.
Yeah.
Michael, would you agree that open source is one of the key components of digital transformation? I mean, if you compare that with the way we used to develop software 15, 20 years ago, where it was more of a closed development environment. But now if you look at cloud, if you look at mobile, if you look at AI, much of the technologies that are powering all of these is open source.
So on a scale of 1 to 100 in terms of importance, I would say it's 4,268 trillion.
Okay.
It is such a fundamental philosophical and technical area. Look, we've got to be adaptive, right? Open source, and I understand why IBM bought Red Hat. I understand why Microsoft went to GitHub. Open source is what the next generation will leave as its legacy to us baby boomers. It is absolutely the way we have to go, because it is effectively like saying, would you employ somebody purely based on gender or race or anything else? No, open source says you take the very best of what you can get when you need it to make something amazing. I think everything's going to become cloud native. I think containers become a huge part of this process.
Right.
I think workflows, for example, how do I think about my workflow? Well, you can't think about workflow in a closed architecture. You have to think about workflow in an open source environment. It is the great, while I always dislike the constant pictures of penguins with Linux, it is without doubt the greatest gift this generation will leave to technology is an open source mindset, an open source development process. Now, I think that one of the key issues in open source, and we've known this from work that we've been finishing globally over the last year or so, is that you have to have secure edge. You have to have security sit at the very epicenter of this, because data is more important than currency, right? If it's manipulated in the wrong ways, it's dangerous. And, loss of data, I think, could damage companies' market stock values far beyond intrusions into credit cards. So making sure you have that right adaptive sort of secure anywhere, everywhere approach is vital. And it's trite because it's difficult, but it should be a constant focus of any open source environment. How do I protect? How do I deploy? How do I develop and manage in a highly protected environment? It's really critical.
Fantastic. So that brings us to the end of this great.
That was terrible fun for me.
It was fantastic, and all of our listeners will find value in this. Thank you so much, Michael, for your time.